Good evening, BookTube. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Carrie, if you've never been here before. And tonight we are doing a live book discussion about My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. This was the June book club read for the Black Hearts Book Club. And my lovely co-host, who I've actually never been on a live with. I think I was on a live with you once, but it was like a group thing.
Yeah.
But we've never done just the two of us before. Is Rosie Cockshutt. So if you want to, Rosie, just tell whoever's watching a little bit about what you normally read, things you normally put on your channel, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you all so much. And thank you especially to Carrie for having me, despite me being so incredibly disorganized about this read along. I'm very proud to say I finished the book 2 hours ago and I loved it. I just kept forgetting to read it. Um, so I read a bit of all sorts of things. Lately, I've been reading a lot of fantasy because that's what I've been in the mood for. And this live show is really giving me the kick in the pants to actually get back to my channel, which has been a little bit dormant over the last, on and off for the last year, basically. And I'm trying to figure out what I want to come back to posting and figure out how I want to do that. But keep your eyes peeled because maybe there'll be something soon now that I've said it. Maybe it'll be, I'll have to do something.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Rosie reads a ton of great stuff. She's got great reading taste and used to do a bit of baking in a lot of your
I
videos,
did.
if
I
I
really
do
did.
remember correctly.
Yes.
And actually, before we came on the live, she was putting something in the oven, like right,
Yeah.
right then. So, yeah, I think that's pretty common right now among a lot of the people that I follow. Like a lot of people are taking kind of breaks from BookTube. I don't know if there's something in the air. A lot of people have things going on. I myself, the only time I really get on here is to do a live nowadays. I've been doing the shorts, but it's really hard to find the time to do the editing and all of that
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a certain, I have a vision for it that I want. So it's hard to be like, oh, I'm just going to do it really and not care. Cause I'm like, oh, well, if I don't put the time that I want into it to get the thing in my head, it just feels like not right. And
Yeah.
I think for me, it's been a lot of I was a early pandemic channel start sort of situation. And since we've been going back, I've been going back to work more and more and spending more time on that. It's like I'm noticing oh yeah, that's a lot of time in my day. And I'm not even back
Yes.
that much, but just how everything's gone, it's been wow, that was a lot of time and energy that I
Yeah.
could do booktube stuff with and that I'm now doing other stuff with.
Yeah. That's actually a good point because I started my channel during the pandemic too. So we probably I probably follow a lot of people who started around the same
I
time.
think
So
so.
yeah, I think we're probably all feeling that a bit as well. So hello. I want to say hello to a couple people in the chat. I know Stephen Corey is always waiting. He put his little snooze, little snooze emoticons up there. But Chris Joyner said going to be a good one. And Kevin, hey Kevin, good to see you. Of course, Kevin is in the Black Hearts Book Club, so definitely chime in for us. And he loves baking as well. So maybe in the group you guys can give us some good baking tips, some good recipes. I'm not much of a baker. Sadly. All right. Well, Rosie, I guess we'll just start by giving your overall impression of the book. What if you rated it, what you would rate it, and what your reading experience was like. Obviously, yours is a lot more fresh than mine, so I'll let you go first.
Sounds good. I absolutely loved it. I have been, as with so many other things, not getting really into books lately, and My Cousin Rachel was so captivating. Like, at first, I wasn't too sure. Like, the first chapter, I was kind of like, oh, am I gonna like this as much as Rebecca? I'm not totally sure. But the further in I got, the more I was just like absolutely hooked. And I love that about du Maurier's writing, because she can take situations and storylines that I think a lot of authors, they would be good but not great, but the way she writes them is just incredible. And that held true through the very end of the last chapter for me.
Good. I'm glad, because I thought you might like it better than Rebecca.
Okay. Had you read it before?
I had not. This was my first reading of it, but every time I took a break from reading, I literally would look at my husband and go, "This is a fantastic book." Like, I just kept repeating that. Like, I don't know, I just felt the need to tell whoever was around at the time, like, this book is so fantastic. Yeah, it's one of those books that I think it definitely grabs you, and it's one that, having read it, looking back, it's worth a reread, which is something that I do not do. Like, I'm usually a one and done. There's very few books I've reread, because I'm like, obviously there's so many books I need to read still, so why would I reread this one? Oh yeah, absolutely, I'm gonna reread this book. Like, I just know I am. And yeah, I'm kind of like, ugh, what's all the fuss about Rebecca? This is the one that people need to be talking about. And actually, this copy I have, I know it's a little bit worse for wear. It's not a first edition, but it's pretty darn close.
Yeah,
because I looked at the
cool.
first edition, and it's the same dust jacket and everything. So I really looked out on this one, and the original owner was Audrey Braga.
Aw, that's so cool.
Read it in August of 1952, which is the year it was released. So I'm guessing she read it as soon as she got it. But yeah, loved this book. Let's see what Kevin has to say here. He said it was one of the best written books I've ever read. The way she described everything was great. Yes.
Absolutely.
So I guess I'll just state the premise here. So the premise of the book is, for anyone watching this who hasn't read it, there is a grand estate, as usual in England. And we have this gentleman, Ambrose Ashley, who is raising his nephew, correct?
I think his cousin.
Okay, cousin, raising his cousin Philip, who is going to be his heir. And Ambrose has never been married. And what do you know, when he goes away for a season, due to his health, he meets a woman in Italy, and that is my cousin Rachel, and they get married. And so there's a lot of mystery around Rachel, and I don't want to say too much right here at the beginning in case someone wants to read it, but there's a lot of dark, creepy vibes. Yes, definitely reminds me of Rebecca in that, when it first started, I don't know about you, Rosie, when it first started, I was a little bit like, is this going to be too much like Rebecca?
Yeah.
Yeah, even with the name Rachel.
Yeah. And like the emphasis on the name so much again.
Yes. They kept repeating, my cousin Rachel, my cousin Rachel, my cousin Rachel. So if I do that during this video, it's because du Maurier did it first. But yeah, at the beginning I thought, oh, this is a little too much like Rebecca, but no, definitely not. Totally different storyline here, but there's a lot of mystery around see, here I go, Rebecca. There is a lot of mystery around Rachel and the relationship that she has with Ambrose. And what did you think about how the book began? Because if I remember correctly, there's a pretty odd scene.
Yes, it was very stark and like,
Yeah,
okay, what's going on here? And then jump and you sort of, I'd not forgotten about it because they mentioned that location a few times throughout the book, but it never actually seemed to be very important. They never really called back to that scene until they do at a critical point, which I won't mention here because, you know, you guys might want to read the book. But like when it does come back again, it was, oh, okay, which I enjoyed because by that point, honestly, kind of forgotten about it.
yeah. I mean, the beginning. Now looking back at it, now that we know the ending and everything,
Yeah.
even looking at the interactions at the beginning and the scenes at the beginning, it's like, okay, yeah, I really want to look at that with a bit of a more, discerning eye and kind of see if I can pick up on any clues or anything during that beginning scene. Did you have this figured out at all? Was it too predictable, or were you pretty surprised?
I don't think I was surprised, but I think it could have gone either way, and I wouldn't have been terribly surprised either way. I
Yeah.
think um, I suspected. I don't think I ever saw Rachel the way Philip saw Rachel. I think I always saw Rachel the way Louise saw Rachel, and connected much more with that view. And that one made like that to me was very much the image of Rachel I had in my head throughout the whole book was that side of her. But as to the more extreme ends of her actions, shall I say, I think that could have gone either way, and I wouldn't have been particularly surprised.
Okay. All
What
right.
about you?
I'm going to say, guys, go ahead if you're watching this and you haven't read the book. You need to read this book. Number one, you
Yes.
must read this book. Log off this video right now and go read it, because of course now I'm like, okay, I'm dying for us to get into this, and it's kind of hard to when you can't
Yeah.
you can't speak on what's happening. So if you don't want the spoilers, jump out now. Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I could see it going either way, and I wouldn't have been disappointed either way, I think.
Yeah.
But I think the way it ended, it's more fun. I mean, this sounds grim because we are talking about a murder pretty much at the very end scene there, but it's more fun, I think, because we were led to believe throughout the book that there's something amiss with Rachel. It's Rachel.
Yes.
Something is going on there. And I think the way it was written, I was inclined to believe that from Jump Street. But now knowing the background and knowing connections between Ambrose's behavior and Philip's behavior and how similar they were, I really want to go back and look for those clues. Like, I think it's more fun this way because now, you can go back, and I think there are things, like I do think there are breadcrumbs back there that,
Yes.
connect. And that's kind of the fun part because, in the group chat, there were a couple people who were talking about connecting things. I mean, days and days after we'd finished the book, so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'd finished it, and a couple days later, something would come to me and I'd say, oh gosh, like I didn't really think about that. But, yeah, I like that little mystery that leaves connections behind. Kevin, I thought Philip was going to kill her. Kevin, did you think that from the beginning? When did you start to believe
Yeah.
that? Because I did piece it together, obviously, when the construction worker comes to him and says,
Yeah, that was
make sure you're careful and no one is walking on this area. I was like,
Chekhov's
oh no,
bridge.
that's definitely gonna happen. Like, I know he's gonna go there. I know that if things don't go his way, that he is gonna send Rachel to her death. So yeah, I knew it by then, but I don't think I had any inkling that he was murderous. I mean, I guess I don't know. I guess the scene before that where he strangles or
Yeah.
puts, he attempts to strangle her. He puts his hands around her neck. Um, that was a little glimpse, but I think I may have dismissed that at the time because it coincided with this illness.
Oh, interesting.
And so I was like, oh, well, obviously he was like out of his mind. He was delirious because it's right after that he goes into this state, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's why. And that was a really smart play. That was a really smart play
I actually hadn't
because,
connected that one yet. I was so
yeah,
focused on the strangulation that I wasn't looking at the connection with the illness, like with Ambrose.
yeah. So I was like, oh, well, it's got to be a brain thing. It's got to be. It's got to be. And he was out of his mind. What did you make of the illnesses between Ambrose and Philip?
It's so interesting, right? Because what du Maurier does so well is she makes everyone a fundamentally unreliable narrator. So
Yes.
we only ever get the perspective of the people who are actively experiencing the symptoms, which very easily could be the delusions caused by some sort of brain fever or the effects of being poisoned.
Yeah.
And I personally feel like they were being poisoned. I'm perfectly happy to accept Rachel as a poisoner and honestly doesn't diminish my liking of her character that much. I don't know why, but um but it is great how she yeah, couches everything in that uncertainty. Up until when I was just talking about it now, I was inclined to trust Ambrose. I don't know why. We don't know him at all, really, as a character. We have no reason to think that he's any more sensible or, well, I guess we have some reason to think he's a bit more sensible than Philip, but like, I was trusting his letters and his assessments of what he was feeling. But then as I was talking, I was like, oh no, but he was experiencing whatever it was. So who knows?
Yeah, I loved Ambrose from the start, and we didn't get much of him. I mean, I think that's a testament, if anything, to the writing, because very early on in the book, because of his health, right, he has to go spend his winters or
Yeah.
summers or whatever it is, out of the country, and so we see a little snippet of him from Philip's childhood and growing into adulthood, just little snippets, and then we're just getting the letters. But like you said, I was inclined to trust him as well. I loved his character. I was like, oh, this guy's great. I think probably some of that had to do with the fact that he was so attentive and, loving to Philip. I think
Absolutely.
that definitely played a part because, you know, um, especially this is kind of, I guess, stereotype, I suppose, but, sometimes those sort of upper class families, they're not super hands on with the
Yeah.
raising part. And the fact that this isn't even his child, right? And he
Mhm.
doesn't have a wife, and he's not really putting it off on the staff, right, to
And I
take
think he
care
must
of
have been
him.
pretty young. I can't remember the exact age
Yeah,
difference, but he can't have been that old
yeah,
when he adopted Philip.
yeah.
'Cause they're only, I think, about 20 years apart. So, yeah,
Which explains the bachelor pad status of the
yeah,
estate.
it's true. He got, like, perpetually stuck in the cool bachelor dad stage. I have to say I was kind of split on him at first because when we interacted with him in person, I found him kind of a prick. Like,
Yeah,
a very well, like, I like that she didn't shy away from making Philip and Ambrose incredibly misogynistic in many ways.
yeah.
But it did kind of put me off at first. But then once he was removed and we were just hearing about him through his actions and his letters, I was like, oh, this guy seems really sensible. And then we, yeah, we see the memories of childhood and stuff. And it's like, okay, more and more he grew on me until, yeah, I just came to trust him for really no good reason.
The dogs trusted him.
Yeah,
They vouched for him. That's a good reason.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I think that whole like kind of vibe that they had together, and how close they were when and relaxed. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. Their relationship was very relaxed with one another.
yeah,
And in these sorts of settings, these, estates in England, it's not usually that way.
yeah,
We're getting relationships where things are always unsaid and everyone has to adhere to, the
yeah,
expectations of society and that sort of thing. And Ambrose didn't seem to care a whit about, a lot of that stuff, which was pretty cool. I'm gonna
yeah.
check in with Kevin here. He said, um, fairly early on, when he was blaming Rachel for everything, I thought he would kill her to revenge Ambrose.
Hmm.
And Ambrose's dad died of something similar, so it could have been that. Yeah, that whole aspect of it to me was really interesting. And I have so many questions because Ambrose did have some sort of brain tumor. I think that's what they landed on, that it was some sort of brain tumor
Yeah,
that he had that was causing this. And it does seem to run in the family. Um, and so, that goes back to the unreliable narrator thing. What can we trust when literally two-thirds of your your main players in the book, they are quite possibly hallucinating. The paranoia, the suspicion, the you know turning against people that are closest to you. I think that is so psychologically thrilling. I mean, there's just so many
yeah,
different ways that this could go. I liked what you said though. You were committed to the fact that Rachel is a poisoner. What what and you don't care either way. You still like her.
yeah.
What convinced you of that? What was the evidence that you feel kind of proved that?
Well, I'm not sure it really proved it. I think it's partly that from the beginning, she was firmly a con woman in my view. Like, I don't know why, but I just had this very distinct, like, sense from the beginning that she was absolutely conning Philip. Whether she intentionally married Ambrose to con him or not, I don't know. But the whole way through, her behavior to me was like, okay, whether she's like, she's being subtle, she's being clever, but she is running circles around this guy continuously. Um, so I think I already had that sense of her in my head. So from there, it wasn't that big of a leap to go, oh, well, the next step is why wouldn't she be poisoning them? Um, and I guess it also makes like I take Philip's experience of finding the seeds in her desk as a like thing that happened. Now, did it actually? Did he
Yeah,
hallucinate that? Who
right.
knows, right? But given his other situations, that to me felt fairly real. I didn't, completely distrust that, especially when we have had the establishment from all characters, including Rachel herself, how like skilled she is with herbs and like all of her curing tisanes and everything. That didn't seem to me like
A stretch.
a stretch at
Yeah.
all. And I think by that point, I just disliked Philip so much as a character. Like I enjoyed the book so much, but
Yeah.
him as a person and a character, I just did not like. That I was kind of
Well,
like,
and you like him
yeah,
less and
fine.
less and less, you know?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that's yeah, I like that about the book too. It just it draws you in, and then it kind of it changes so much. It changes so much from what I thought it was going to be at the start of the book.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Stephen, happy 4th of July to you as well. Um, cautiously becoming interested in reading this book. I can assure you this is not a Nora Roberts, so you can jump right into My Cousin Rachel. I can promise you. Lady
Absolutely.
Jane, good to see you, Jane. Always good to see you. And Jane, I know, yep, this is one of your favorites. So if you have any sort of input you want to throw in the chat, feel free. Oh, here we go. This one almost feels like it's related to Rebecca. In my mind, Rachel was almost like Rebecca, Maxim's deceased first wife. Totally not, but fun to think about.
Maybe she's some ancestor or something.
Well, the
He's okay.
name itself, I mean, I was
Yeah.
getting, I kept, when I did a message in the group chat, every time I finished a message, I was like, I really hope I said Rachel instead of Rebecca.
Speaking of which, I know it came up briefly in the group chat, but did we ever come to a conclusion about when this is set? Because I had a very 1850s or 60s ish view in my head. I don't know why, just how Rebecca was described, I think. Now I'm doing it, just how
Yep.
Rachel was described and like the way her clothing was described. It was never very like concrete, but it gave me that like, kind of pre Civil War era, except in England
Yeah.
vibe. But
Yeah.
what did you think?
Yeah. I thought around the same time as well. I don't know that we landed um, on a specific decade in the 1800s. But I think there was some discussion of that. But I'm with you. I'm thinking, 1840s, 1850s, somewhere in there.
Right.
Um, Philip seems so immature the entire book. The fact that Rachel and Philip saw Ambrose and Philip as being so similar made me start to dislike Ambrose. Yeah,
Yeah,
good
that's
point,
actually a good
Kevin.
point.
Yeah. The everything amped up though with Philip, which could be the result of the poisoning, right? Or it could be the
Yep.
result of this brain dysfunction, this brain issue that he seems to have, um, or it could be the result of a similar sort of brain issue, but mental illness.
And
because he does seem to have these kind of like psychotic breaks from reality. You know, like when he's strangling Rachel.
yeah,
You know, he definitely
interestingly,
has
at that point, I don't think I saw that as a psychotic break. I think at that point, I disliked Philip enough to be like, yeah, maybe he is the kind of guy who'd actually be entitled enough to like do that because he has no ability to handle someone telling him no.
rejection. Yeah.
And I think the other element that I find cool about Philip and Ambrose being similar is we hear that some from the other characters, but we think we hear it the most from Rachel. And that to me makes any true character comparison feel kind of like, again, just it's fuzzy because in my view, Rachel absolutely knows how Philip looks up to Ambrose. So if she's, doing her thing, her, get him on her side thing, of course she's going to go there. And of course she's going to emphasize that because she knows that that's what he wants to hear.
What's interesting about that, I kind of looked at it maybe a different way. Now I'm rethinking all of my thoughts about this book. I think that's one great thing
Yeah,
about this book
that's
because
the cool thing. Like,
I'm just rethinking
yeah,
because I'm like, okay, no, Rosie thinks she's definitely poisoning everyone. Okay, yeah, I think that might be right. But I think at the end of the book, I was so sympathetic towards Rachel, obviously because of her
mm-hmm.
demise, because of this fatal ending that she has, and I thought to myself, this poor woman, when you really think about
Yes,
it, she is coming to stay in this house with this complete stranger who looks just like her husband, only younger.
yeah,
And, there were moments like, obviously there are tender moments between the two. There are moments where she gets upset there, and I think a lot of that could be explained through her processing the grief. Maybe she
absolutely.
truly loved Ambrose, and I cannot even imagine being in this sort of circumstance. And then something else too, she really took a lot of time and care into working on the gardens, which
Yeah,
was Ambrose's like
it's
wish that,
true.
you know, and, I know that was one of her passions as well, but, that was something that they shared together. So looking back at the end, when it first ended, I was just looking back thinking, wow, like maybe she was actually loyal to Ambrose.
That's sort of
Um,
the impression that I got too. Like, I never got the feeling that at least initially she was just in it for that with Ambrose. But by the time she showed up actually in person on the page, I feel like that had developed, and I don't know why exactly. I think, yeah, just hearing about their early time together, and again, for no reliable reason to feel this way based on anything in the narration, but just
yeah.
like trusting the vibe that Du Maurier is giving me unreliably. um, I do feel that, like, yeah, they had a genuine connection, and there could have been something there, at least to start with.
Jane said, that's the fun thing about Du Maurier's books. She always seems to leave some really basic point out. And Rebecca, I believe it was the protagonist's name. Rachel, it's the time frame. Very interesting. Yeah, maybe maybe that's intentional. I don't know. Are any of the characters an example? Okay, I can always count on Steven to come out with some really tough, hard hitting questions here. Are any of the characters an example of a classic sociopath? That would help me develop some interest in reading it. Well, I always forget, Rosie. I'm actually looking it up because I always forget the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath.
I can never remember either.
So, um, sociopath is a lack of remorse, but guilt and empathy may be present in some cases. Some emotions are felt, like rage, but they are shallow and fleeting, may form close attachments to one or few individuals, consistent irresponsibility and repeated violations of laws and expectations, constant lying and deception, aggressive and reckless behavior. Well,
I think you'll have to read it and find out because
I think that's up for debate.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't. Interesting. I think something else too with a sociopath. If I may be mistaken, Stephen. So if you know, you can correct me. But I think one of the differences between a psychopath and a sociopath is a sociopath, a lot of it is environmental. So it could be based on like how they were raised, what sort of environment they were in, like some of those sort of antisocial behaviors, develop out of that. So that could certainly be true because when I think about it now, at the beginning of the book, I was like, oh, this is such a loving, little like bromance, adopted, son situation here. But now it seems kind of isolating. I mean, when I think about it, the only times that Philip was away was boarding school, and that's it. Like he hasn't visited the only time he went to a different country was when he, went to check on Ambrose. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, have to read it.
Yeah. And it feels on his isolation, it's kind of interesting because it's that weird line again of is that a some people like their hometown and their place and like that's cool. Like they've got, they're so involved. Ambrose especially was so involved with like clearly the running of his estate and like the people there. And initially Philip was as well. He was, he was engaged within his sphere. He just had a very small sphere. Or
Yeah,
is that
Ambrose
like
set it up that way.
yes, that Ambrose had something that he, for whatever reason, didn't want to go outside of that and then kept Philip not knowing anything else.
And part of it may have been just him trying to keep Philip's ties to the estate because
Yeah,
essentially,
absolutely.
he's going to be the heir. But when I think about like he didn't really have any close friends, gentlemen that he was
No.
friends with. The only real friend he had was Louise,
Yes.
and I find that kind of. I mean, I'm not going to say he needed to have, a dozen, guys he's going out with, but one would assume that he would have one or two,
Yeah.
gentlemen in the area that they went riding together or went hunting together or something. And I guess maybe we're not giving him enough credit because he does have good relationships with the staff.
Yes, but not
So
with any of his peers.
yeah. So that is
And
kind of antisocial, I suppose. Yeah.
and I think it's interesting. His one friend is one who isn't at all by choice. Like they get along and they're friends, at least for parts of the book, but purely by circumstance. Purely because her father was friends with Ambrose and they, consulted and worked together and stuff. And Nick Kendall was Philip's godfather or guardian or something. So like, you know, his one social contact sort of thing is through circumstance. And I think that, like, I don't know if it's shelteredness or antisocialness or whatever, I think really shows in his interactions with Rachel. Because at least to me, he read so like, oh my God, man, seriously? Like, you, and I say that as someone who feels very uncomfortable socially and is not good at social interactions myself. But like, just, yeah, reading him was such a case of like, you are so unprepared for social interactions and social interactions, especially with women.
Yes, yes. You know, what did you make of the relationship with Louise? Do you think Louise really loved him?
I think she might have initially. I'm not sure how she felt by the end, and that's probably my own view tainting it. But
Yeah,
I really liked Louise as a character. I thought
me
she
too.
was pretty perceptive and like no good reason other than her externality to the situation by a degree, but I was inclined to trust her assessment of the situation a lot more than Philip's. Um, and I agreed with her, I guess. But I I don't know if I want them to be able to move past what happened or not.
Yeah. Oh, there could totally be a sequel to this.
Yeah.
Jane thought she was poisoning them as well. Kevin says, that's a really good point, Rosie. I didn't consider Rachel could be manipulating Philip the whole time because he was such a jerk. Beth Ann, good to see you. You want to? I think I even own 2 copies. Well, you must like literally stop
It's
watching this
so
right
good.
now and go read it. It is so good. Like you will love it. If you don't love it, I would be totally shocked on that one. So one big thing in the book that we haven't mentioned that I think I haven't really put much thought into actually until this very moment, but want to get your take on it. Um, the pregnancy. So,
Mm.
Rachel was pregnant by Ambrose. And according to her timeline of events, you know, that is a real turning point in their relationship. What do you think on that?
I it's just questions all the way down because I buy that she probably was pregnant. But then from there it's just like branching possibilities, right? Of like, did she miscarry or did she use a herbal remedy, right? Like, it doesn't seem beyond the scope of possibility that she might have gone, wait, that's not the move I want to make right now, or that's not, like, based on everything else that we've heard about her, she's been referred to as like an old midwife jokingly a few times, that like that seems very possible. I think it's very probable that her behavior changed afterwards. I also suspect that Ambrose was probably affected in ways that he might not have had the like self-awareness to recognize that. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he was, yeah, given his relationship with Philip, I would expect him to be, probably quite excited by the prospect of being a father himself,
Yeah.
especially at 43 or 44 or whatever he was. Like, that's so that event, whatever it was, I can see having a big impact on him, which then, who knows, does that just like initially a, mental state sort of thing, or is it a like traumatic brain event that like deteriorates his health to the point that he develops, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I have no idea what to make of that, other than I fairly believe that it happened, and I believe that in some way it was an instigating factor in something, but how and why and in what manner is just a black hole.
Yeah, I hadn't thought much about it until that very moment, but I too, thought maybe she, induced the miscarriage with these herbs because that is such a heavy part of the storyline. But then part of me is also like, here we go again. We are disparaging women for their medicinal,
Yeah.
knowledge. Like, here we go. Like, and one thing that kind of sparked that, Jane, popped into the chat, and we've read some books on witches, and it's the same story. It's like, as soon as women start getting a bit of, knowledge and autonomy and being able to help people and kind of take charge, it's like always a bad thing. So, here we go again. We're judging this poor woman,
Well, and
but
again, that's the weird thing I find about Rachel, because by all accounts, like as I said, I think she's a con artist. I think she's a murderer. I don't know what else she is. Um, but I still don't dislike her. There's something about the way Philip behaves that makes me kind of go, you deserve it. And I don't know why. Like, and until later in the book when he starts to, behave violently and like he gets a bit extreme, but like I was just maybe his dislike for her before he had any sense of her, I don't know, which was perfectly rational from his perspective, but like I don't know, something about it just made me dislike him and therefore go like, yeah, you're a criminal, but like I like you as a character anyways, Rachel.
you know what's funny? I just liked how easily and quickly he fell under her spell, because
Yeah.
I identified with his outrage to start, because I also, was, in love with the Ambrose character. So I was like, obviously, like, she is killing this poor man. Like, do something, do something about this. So I was a little bit peeved that he didn't stick to his guns and question her or do something at the beginning. It just seemed like he, fell under the spell, and I guess by the end of the book, I was under Du Maurier's spell because it was just like, just so wonderful. But so I guess I can relate. But yeah, that to me, just,
I think
I wanted justice, and I don't know. I don't know, by the end, I don't know what justice would have been.
yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah,
Like I think the fact that Philip fell for it so quickly reinforced Rachel's like mystic con artistiness for me, because it sort of felt a bit like a TV show montage of like, the middle, well, I don't know, the 35-year-old, sexy like con woman who comes in and sweeps in and just like instantly magically everyone is in love with her and like, doing her bidding. It felt so like that I think it reinforced in my head that sense that like, oh, this is not just like a charismatic grieving woman. This is someone who's explicitly like pushing the buttons to get her way here.
yeah. You know, for me, I guess it's kind of simple. I'll give you one dead husband, but two, I mean, I start getting suspicious. I mean, I know mortality rates obviously a lot different back then. And, the fact that Ambrose was a bit older and he was already experiencing health issues,
Yes.
so I kind of, in my mind, I was immediately suspicious because I was like, okay, two dead husbands, come on. But then I'm like, no, we'll give her a
That's
break because Ambrose, he did have these
that
issues.
that's why I wasn't sure if she was actually a poisoner until close to the end, and then I felt pretty confident. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, just the whole situation felt like very much hitting on the points that I would expect for that situation. Um, Although she does show certain behaviors throughout the book, I guess, that kind of push back on that. But I don't know. For me, yeah, I think I like that sort of character. So for me, it was easy to see that in her, and then just still up until towards the end, be kind of cheering for it.
Well, and two, I think something else that was set up really well with the situation she finds herself in. I think as women, you tend to be more sympathetic towards a female character trying to make their way in that world. And,
Yeah.
the fact that she was able to do that. Now, how she does it, obviously, that can be argued. But I think she kind of stood alone and stood apart. And so, you can acknowledge that that is a difficult place to find herself in.
And I think that's sort of the magic of Du Maurier's writing sometimes is she takes these characters who can like objectively, I'm like, I don't condone her actions. I don't like a
Right.
lot of what she did, but she's still written in a way that is so incredible. Like through the book, I have fallen under her spell,
Yeah.
and despite all of that, I see it's like an illusion almost a character illusion of like I'm seeing both the like I see how you're a con artist, but I'm still falling for it. Like I'm mocking Philip for falling for it and being like, come on, man, open your eyes a bit. Like, think about this. But also watching her work that magic is kind of magical in and of itself for me, I think.
Yeah, for sure. There were a lot of really cool descriptions in the early parts that captured for me those early stages of falling in love. Now, I didn't agree with Philip falling in love with her. Like, I was like, come on, dude. But I was really impressed by how Du Maurier captured that. Now, looking back, of course, at the time, I was like, oh, this is really great. How he talks about just he's so in tune to her movements and he's really paying attention, when her skirt makes a sound, coming around the corner or coming down the steps, like he's just, um, looking for that. He's listening for that. He's just so anticipating the next time they're together. The way she described that is just phenomenal. Like it captured something for me. However, after finishing the book, I sat back and I was like, you know what? Some of that stuff was, I guess, kind of creepy now. Like I'm looking back and I'm like, God, all that stuff that I thought was so tender and sweet, now I'm looking at it with a critical eye and I'm like, yeah, no, I've got to go back and look at that again.
And I think that's partly her genius with the narrator, right? Because
Yeah.
we're experiencing that from Philip's perspective. We're
Yeah.
experiencing that with him. We're feeling that through his eyes. So, of course, it's going to have that, like, you're going to have, it has that feeling effect. But then when you're a bit more separated from the, like, that immediate moment, you suddenly look at it from, I think, like, at least for me, like, oh, from my outside perspective and go, like, oh, wait. right?
Yeah.
Her narrators are just so good. Like,
So good.
I hate Philip, but like the way she narrates this book through him is genius.
It is. Steven says, can you give a comparison to the movie? The movie previews intrigued me. I have not seen it.
I have not seen it yet either.
Nor have I seen any of the previews, but maybe someone else in the chat has. Kevin said, but if Louise liked Philip, couldn't she have been anti-Rachel out of jealousy? That's how I read it at the beginning, Kevin. Absolutely. Like,
yeah, like when they first met.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I do think you're right. I do think she was more perceptive in that she knew there was a con.
And I'm not sure how much Louise, like, I don't have any sense really for where Louise falls on that spectrum between like she was fully on board and wanted to marry Philip at the beginning of this to like he was also her childhood friend, but like just like he hadn't thought about it at all. She was sort of like, oh no, I hadn't really, like, I don't have a sense for where she falls in that. And how she does feel sort of, I guess, puts weight on one view versus another. But I think because her assessment aligned with mine, right, I was inclined to find her reasonable.
Yeah. You know, with Louise, I think in my mind, it just seemed like her and her father figured it was a foregone conclusion that her and Philip were going to end up together. And I never got the idea from Louise that there were any other prospects out there. And just, you know, knowing what we know about women in that time period, one would assume there would be. So I do feel like, but I can't, you're right. I can't really get a sense of whether that is because she does have affection for him because they are childhood friends and she knows that he is going to be her future and she's okay with that. Or is it because she's in love with him, you know, and she's told her dad, like, this is what I want? You know, I don't know. It's hard to say.
I always got the impression that, at least the way I read it, it felt like that was something Nick Kendall and Ambrose had talked about, like, from the time they were little kids. And we really don't have that much of a perspective of the relationship that Louise and her father have, other than the fact that it appears to be affectionate and appears to be trusting and fairly good. So yeah, she very well could be falling, you know, feel exactly the same way that her dad does. And she's like, oh yeah, that's just what's going to happen someday. But it comes back to that interesting, like, complete lack of other young male characters, right? We've got Nick Kendall, who's older, and the vicar, who's presumably older. We've got Mrs. Pascoe, we've got Rachel, we've got Louise, and we've got the various vicar's daughters, right? But we really don't get the circle expanded beyond that much. There's that sense of like that isolation of like, it's not clear if Nick Kendall and Louise are as extreme about it outside of their relationship with Ambrose and Philip, but there does seem that sense of like the very small closed circle of like, we've got the two people that we associate with and that's about it.
Yeah, and you know, now that you say that, the setting of this, it is kind of similar to Rebecca in that it's a bit creepy, a bit isolating. You know, you have the sea there, which it doesn't play quite as much of a role in this as it does Rebecca, obviously, but
yeah.
you know, Philip does go out and take that impromptu swim out there, and that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of one of the things that I guess I think one of the things that maybe contributes to his illness. I can't remember, but
I think I got the sense that it did.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I think that kind of the setting does kind of fit in with the other aspects of the book, like how it is isolated. It is, things that I initially maybe saw as relaxing or heartwarming. The fact that the house hadn't been updated.
Yeah.
And, I think maybe the fact that Rachel, when she came in, she's like, oh no, like we need new drapery, we need new this and that. Maybe it
Mm-hmm.
looked worse than I had imagined it. Like I had imagined
Yeah.
it as kind of cozy, maybe a little
Yeah,
dirty,
same.
but
Like
like,
maintained, but not
yeah,
fashionable. Like the way they talk about Ambrose taking care of the land and stuff, I always got the sense that like he was responsible and careful and he wasn't going to go out and, redecorate all the time or be like, oh, I don't really care what, but that like things would be, yeah, clean and maintained. But that's true that we only get that through Philip's perspective, who
yeah.
is, as we keep saying, incredibly unreliable.
I want Rachel's perspective. I want a book from
Yes.
her perspective.
Midnight Sun, my cousin Rachel version.
That's right. Absolutely. 100%. I would totally buy that book.
Yes.
And Steven says there's nothing wrong with an intelligent woman. There's everything wrong with an intelligent, evil woman. And maybe she was, maybe she wasn't.
Yeah.
I just don't know. Philip seemed like a schoolboy with a crush on the first attractive woman he sees. Is that her fault? What's funny though, he kept saying, I don't think he called her unattractive, but he took great pains in the beginning to not notice or not care. Do you think that was genuine, or do you think he was fighting this affection that he was starting to have for her?
I honestly, it could go either way. In my head, she's not a great beauty. Like, she's pretty enough, sort of thing, but like one of those people where the draw is her personality, that the way she interacts with everyone and the way she speaks with people and the way she makes the people around her feel, in my picturing of her, was always a big part of her appeal. So I can sort of read it that way, as like at first glance he's kind of like, okay, but then the more she interacts with him, the more beautiful she becomes.
Yeah, that's a great point. I did, pick up on the fact that she's charismatic and a little bit enigmatic. I mean, in the way she
Yeah.
carries herself, she seems to have confidence, an air of confidence about her, that I think, that translates well. I think people think you're more attractive or more intelligent or more, whatever, based on how you conduct yourself, how you, walk, how you interact with people, all of that, how you handle high pressure situations, because, she is in a
Yeah.
foreign country. So yeah, definitely that. And then, even though she's technically a cousin, right? So she's coming
Like
home
in two
supposedly.
different ways, which like I did not expect the title to be so literal. Like,
I actually did. I was like, yeah, it looks to be that time. You know what I mean? It looks to
yeah,
it
fair.
looks to be that time. Um, but yeah, even though she's technically, coming home sort of, she's still foreign, to most of these folks. Like most of the folks in Philip's life are going to look on her as foreign, and that kind of makes her a bit of a novelty, I think,
Yeah.
for them, like,
Yeah,
after
really.
church, they're kind of like all crowding
Oh my
around
god,
her.
in
Yeah.
Italian.
Speak Italian for
Exotic.
us. Um, you know, which fair enough. I mean, we've talked about how isolating it is there. The poor folks are
Mhm.
like probably just happy
Absolutely.
to see somebody new. But I think that added to her mystique and kind of like her attraction.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jane says definitely need a Rachel point of view book. Absolutely.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Completely agreed.
Thank you, Chris. A great discussion. Very interesting. You know, I think we've pretty much covered the bases, Rosie. But is there anything that I did not mention? Any questions you have? Any thoughts? Anything you want to
I
chat
have
about?
nothing further about my cousin Rachel, but I do have one thing that I wanted to share before
Okay. Yeah.
we go. So this is completely tangential, but I was in Boston last fall and I went to the JFK Presidential Library and I thought of you the whole time. The whole time I was there looking at everything, I was like, oh my God, I bet Carrie has been here. I bet Carrie has looked at all of this stuff. And
You know what is so wild?
yeah.
Last fall was the first time I had been
Oh,
to the
really? That's
JFK.
so
Yeah,
cool.
last fall we could have been there at the same time. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it's funny. I got my friend because it was like my oh god, it's like one of my dreams. And it just worked out that I was traveling somewhere else. I wasn't even going to Boston, but we ended up having a really long layover, like 6 hours. And I was like, okay, guys, you know what we have to do. Like, we're going to the JFK Museum and Library. So I took a picture of me, like, jumping up and down out in front of the museum. It was great. It was just absolutely fantastic. I get chills actually just thinking about it, just seeing all the great stuff there. And yeah, oh,
Yeah.
love it.
It was
Definitely want to go
incredible.
back. That's
Yeah,
that's
we didn't have enough time there. We went, funnily enough, on our way, like on our last day. It was like halfway between our hotel and the airport. So we're like, okay, we'll check out of our hotel, go to the museum, like spend a couple hours there, then continue on to the airport. And as soon as we got there, I was like, should have left more time for this because there is so much cool stuff and like
yeah,
not enough time to absorb all of the information here.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Kevin says that is a great library. It is. The museum on Hyannis is great too. Yeah, you'll have to give me some information on that, Kevin. Um, and I don't know if I could stay anywhere near that. It's probably a bit out of my price range, but um, yeah, I would love to see that as well. So thank you so much, Rosie, for
Thank
agreeing to co
you.
host this. And what a lovely discussion. It's always great to see your face on BookTube. So thanks so much. And thanks to everybody who joined in.
Yeah, thank you. This has been so much fun. We sat down and said, well, we really haven't prepared much. And somehow the book took us on well over an hour. And if nothing else we have said has convinced, well, hopefully you haven't listened to all of this without reading it because
Yes.
spoilers, but seriously, wow, what an incredible book.
And even if you have listened to this and you've heard all the
Oh,
spoilers,
yeah, still go
still
read it.
read it. Because like I said, I do not reread books and I want to reread this one. So for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, have a great night. We'll see you on the
Good
next one.
night. Bye.